You probably heard the infamous phrase, that time of the month. Or, an even wittier one, visit from Aunt Flo. Now, no matter which version of this phrase you've heard of, and trust me, in this region, people get really creative with the language, the meaning stays the same. The person that this phrase is referring to is on their period and is bleeding. Have we always tried to mask our periods with other words than the ones that already exist and are not even that hard to pronounce? Have we always been creating advertisements in which the portrayed women are running around blissfully with awkward blue stains on their hygienic pads? I don't know about you, but my periods are pretty red. And I'm pretty sure I'm not smiling all the time either. So, how can we explain this? In order to give you an explanation, I'll have to take you back in time. Over the course of the time, people, societies, and cultures perceived menstruation differently. So, for example, in this first Latin encyclopedia, dating back to 73 AD, it was said that contact with menstrual blood turns new wine sour. Crops touched by it become barren. Grafts die. Crops touched by it become barren. Grafts die. Seed in gardens are dried up. The fruit of trees fall off. The edge of steel and the gleam of ivory are dulled. Hives of bees die. Even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with incurable poison. Wow. I'm pretty sure if this were to be true, many men in today's world would have found a way to monetize it and make war weapons out of it. But maybe then we would be talking about menstrual blood much more than we do today, right? But this is only one side of the coin. For example, in Egyptian medical texts, it was said that menstruation had a power to cure and a power to heal. And the word that was used for menstruation, many argue today, means purification. And don't be fooled by it. These contrasts, they still exist today. They're not unique to the ancient times. Women are still perceived as supernatural, divine, or as death, poison, danger. Basically, women are perceived as everything except humans. When I was a little girl, the community I was living in wasn't allowing women to enter church and other holy places when they were on their periods, during that time of the month, if you wish. When I asked why, I was met with the response that the blood that was coming out of us was dirty, and we were not clean enough to enter such holy places. This was an unwritten rule, it wasn't the law. It was passed through generations and generations of women. I heard it from my mother, she heard it from her mother, and so on and so on. As a consequence, I remember the little me wondering what other places she shouldn't desecrate by visiting them while on her period. But to be honest, I didn't even have it that bad. Many women today still live in a reality where they can't talk about their menstruation openly. And all of this has led to them internalizing the feeling of shame. They're not only kept to their homes, women are kept to certain areas of their homes. Girls are forced to miss school. They're not allowed to cook. And not in order to rest, but not to empoison other members of their household. They're not allowed in churches and other holy places, public spaces, and so on and so on. So yes, this has led to women internalizing the feeling of shame. And the constant feeling of shame leads to isolation. And when we are isolated, we don't feel like we're powerful enough to change the things that we find unfair, such as overpaying for our period products. And this is something that's not fair, and it will never be, not in my book. But menstrual taboo doesn't only affect some small group of women somewhere on the south of Serbia. It affects all of us in ways that we might not even recognize at first. Menstrual taboo affects how we talk about the issues connected to menstruation. It affects the debates that happen on your social gatherings, the debates that happen on social media, but also more formal debates, those that happen in parliaments, that have the power and are actively affecting our lives. And then, media coverage, and how media report on the issue is also affected by menstrual taboo. And when the media doesn't fulfill their educational role, this becomes a vicious, never-ending cycle of menstruation stigma. And I can freely say that menstruation stigma is a form of misogyny. It's a heavy statement, I'm pretty aware, but it's true. And if we circle back to the beginning of this speech, when I told you about the names that we thought of for our periods, we can actually see that we are avoiding to name our periods with real words. By avoiding to name our periods, by avoiding to name a thing, we reinforce this idea that the thing should not be named. We treat our menstruation as if it's Voldemort, the one who shall not be named. When we don't have the words, on a more serious note, we can't talk about the real issue. And now you're probably wondering, what is even the real issue after everything that I've said? Everything that I've said so far is the issue. But it's only a tip of an iceberg, and the serious consequences that this leaves marginalizes women and everyone who menstruates. So let's talk about the issue. How much do periods cost? I'll tell you right away, they cost too much. And even if you are privileged enough not to agree with me, there's one simple thing that we have to agree on. Periods should cost nothing. Because what about menstruation screams choice? Nothing. And since periods are mostly charged in most of the countries in the world, this is the issue. And if we are talking about the numbers, let's localize it. Let's talk about the Western Balkans, where you are right now. An average VAT rate on menstruation products in the Western Balkans is 14.5%. VAT rate is a value-added tax rate added to products that we find in our stores. And if you know anything about VAT rate, you'll know that the regular VAT rate in most of the European countries applied to menstrual products is actually 20%. So you're now probably thinking that 14.5 isn't that much. But this number was even higher before the beginning of this year, when North Macedonia and Montenegro both reduced their menstrual products VAT rates to 5 and 7%. So there are changes that are happening, but what about other countries? For example, what about my country? In Serbia, we recognize two VAT rates. One regular VAT rate of 20% and another VAT rate of 10%, a reduced VAT rate. Regular VAT rate is applied to menstrual products and other products as well, while reduced VAT rate is applied to products that are dedicated to meeting basic human needs, so necessities. And my country, unfortunately, doesn't recognize menstrual products as a necessity. So, what is the issue? Do you see it now? But this is the case in most of the European countries, luckily, and in the world. But luckily, many doesn't mean all, and there are certain exceptions to this unfortunate rule. So, for example, in Scotland, menstrual products are distributed for free to all by law, and this was the first country in the world to do such a thing. In New Zealand, menstrual products are distributed free of charge in schools. My question is, again, how do we bring these positive changes here, to our region, to our countries? There's one thing that all of us can do today to change things for the better, and I'll tell you about it. In February of this year, I was a part of the dialogue with the Prime Minister of Serbia. This was the dialogue of the youth that was supposed to address main topics and main issues of the position of the youth in Serbia. Under the umbrella topic of youth security and health, I mentioned menstrual products, because it is about the health in the end and it affects many. During the promo campaign for this dialogue, a video of me introducing this topic went viral on social media. And the comments below were quite negative, but they did make me have an insight about what the problem with our society might be. Because they didn't even understand why I was protesting in the first place. Comments were somewhere along the lines, here you are complaining about a couple of euros, maybe you should earn more and then this won't be a problem for you. Or, here you are complaining about a couple of euros, but then you go off and spend much more money on cigarettes or makeup. I won't even get into it. But there's one thing that I did understand. They didn't understand why the menstrual products should be free. They didn't see it as a necessity. So yes, there are certain things that I spend my money on that I don't necessarily need. But these things are not a necessity, and menstrual products are. I can't choose whether I will bleed this month or not. I was automatically prepaid to this feature from the day that I was born. And unlike Spotify, I cannot cancel it when I don't have the money for it. So, what happens when I don't have the money for it? Thank you. I wish I could now go on and say that our Prime Minister looked at me and said, you got this done, and it was all resolved afterwards. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm pretty stubborn, and so are many people in my country. So I believe that this will happen eventually. But one thing did happen, one positive thing did come out of this. Media picked up on this topic, on the topic of menstrual products and the prices of these products, and they started writing articles about it, creating TV shows, inviting experts and professionals to talk about this issue, comparing prices to other countries, and so on and so on. After that, people started talking about it. So that's one piece of advice that I can give to all of you. Talk about it. Because once we remove the veil of stigma, we start chattering. And a small chatter that was once easy to ignore becomes this loud scream that's too loud to be ignored. And that's how we create change. I see our society as a rubber band. A space for change is made by small steps that all of us can take today. But these small steps, no matter how small they are, they still demand us to go out of our comfort zone. And today, I went out of my comfort zone, came here and talked to you about a topic that I find extremely important. So why don't you be the next? But even if you can't talk about it, that's completely fine too. You can always be on the other side of this. You can always listen. So, thank you for coming out here. Thank you for taking that one small step of creating the space for change in our rubber band of a society. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.